Lighthouse keeper Tom Henderson was enjoying the spectacle that 12th of February in 1935. The biggest airship in the world, the U.S. Navy's flying aircraft carrier Macon, was passing by on her way back to base. And then the scene changed.
Henderson was the first one from the mainland to actually see the tail fin rip from the stern of the Macon.
In the steering room, Navy helmsman Bill Clark remembered the rudder being jolted right out of his hands. The doggone fins, Clark would later complain. He wished they had used the German design with its superior structural bracing. But there was no time to think about that now, because Clark was busy trying to fly a ship that was acting a bit like a giant balloon with the knot untied. In the control car, U.S. Navy Commander Herbert Wiley sent an SOS to Navy ships in the area.
The structural failure caused lots of pieces of metal and things to puncture the after three gas cells. The ship immediately put on full power to keep from dropping into the water. She went up into the clouds.
She started gaining elevation until she got to an altitude of 4,800 feet. The ship was set up to actually outgas helium when it reached a height, which worked against them, and the ship started plummeting slowly down to the ocean.
We now had a sinking situation.
Welcome to another episode of Your Sanctuary, focused on maritime heritage. This program honors the service and crew of two famous U.S. Navy warships, the USS Macon and the USS Independence. The Macon, the last of the great airships, and the Independence, a veteran of World War II, both currently rest on the seafloor in Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. We'll be hearing from experts on the history, discovery, and exploration of these ships, and learn about the cool technologies used to document and characterize these deep-sea wrecks.
Have you seen what's happening in your sanctuary lately? Join us right now for another episode of Your Sanctuary, a program that highlights what makes our National Marine Sanctuary so special and the people that keep them that way.
Right now, let's head out to Point Sur Lighthouse, where Monterey historian Tim Thomas joins us to share some critical points on the Macon's history.
So in 1928, they commissioned a Goodyear Tire Company and also working with the Zeppelin Airship Company in Germany to build two massive airships. One was the USS Akron and the other was the USS Macon. So what makes these dirigibles so unique is they did carry these airplanes, these little Sparrowhawk airplanes, and they actually had hangars inside the airship, inside the Macon, and they could carry up to 5 of these planes at a time. And they had what they called an arrestor, and it was like a big sort of trapeze unit, and there was a hook on the wing, and they would hook the plane up and then drop it down through the belly of the airship, and then the plane would speed up and it just sort of rev its engines up and it would unhook from that thing, then fly off and do its scouting. Then it would come back and actually as the Macon is flying and they drop this arrestor, this trapeze unit down, and then the plane would have to catch it with the hook. And it would actually stall the plane and slam it into the hook and they'd catch it, then pull it back up inside the Macon. They used to call those guys the men in the flying trapeze. And they had a very famous patch that all the pilots would wear that was designed by Captain Wiley. So they did have problems with these planes sometimes. They would get stuck on those trapeze units, and so sometimes a crewman would have to come down and with a big wrench or a hammer bang on that thing to make that thing unlock itself so the planes could take off. These things are also equipped with a thing called a cloud car.
The cloud car, a one-man observation car, is lowered away. This enables the huge airship to float above the clouds, hidden from the ground, while the lone observer below the clouds reports by telephone.
The Macon was Macon initially, after it was built in 1933, was commissioned in 1933, and it was stationed initially up at Lakehurst Early Training. And I had the privilege of meeting a guy named Herbert Wiley, who was the son of Captain Wiley of the Macon, and he talks about seeing the ship fly over their house. He said it was so quiet That was one thing, how eerily quiet it was, that his father would fly over the house and then he would stick his head out of the control car and throw his hat down into the backyard so they knew that Dad was coming home. So the Akron station was the East Coast, Macon was supposed to station on the West Coast, and it did this whole trip across the United States, and people followed it in the newspapers all around the country as it made this trip all the way across the West Coast. I went to Macon, Georgia, where there were big ceremonies presented to the crew in Macon, Georgia. Then it sailed across the United States, finally coming into Sunnyvale, where they built this gigantic hangar. It's now called Moffett Field.
The Navy was counting on Wiley to prove that the naval airship had a future, and the Macon was the last ship left to do it with.
These orders were specific. He should fly it and prove to the Navy that they were worthwhile.
Although its World War I role as a heavy bomber had been taken over by fixed-wing aircraft, the airship was still the best source of long-range reconnaissance.
It's up ship for Navy Day at Sunnyvale, California, as the giant dirigible Macon goes aloft on a demonstration flight to show you how our only air warship operates.
But the Navy's airships were destined never to see combat. The Macon had a date with destiny in the skies off the coast of California.
So one thing that I think is so fascinating about the Macon when it crashed, that word got out quickly. There was a Monterey sardine fishing boat right off the Point Sur Light Station here, fishing sardines. It was towards the end of the sardine season. And he watched this thing crash. And he had radio on his boat, and he was radioing back to Monterey that was being filtered to a radio station at the Hotel Del Monte, and they were reporting this thing as it was crashing into the Monterey Bay.
When carrying its personnel and Sparrowhawk aircraft, the Macon weighed more than 400,000 pounds, or the equivalent of 2 100-ton blue whales.
Coming right up is the story of the discovery of the wreck of the USS Macon and the significant role the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute played in finding the wreck and documenting the debris field.
The Macon had accommodations for 100 officers and men, including sleeping berths, a large mess room, a galley, and observation platforms in the nose and tail.
I'm here with Bob Schwimmer, who's our regional expert on all things maritime heritage. Bob, welcome to your sanctuary.
Thank you.
So Bob, tell us more about the technology that was used in 2006 to get these incredible images of the wreck and the wreck site.
It's a research vessel, Western Flyer, has dynamic positioning, which is critical to ROV operations. It communicates with satellites and allows the ship to stay on station without anchoring. And that's critical when you have a tethered vehicle like an ROV working in a deep water environment. You can't anchor the ship. You actually have to follow the ROV and track with it. In this case, we used a robotic navigating system designed by Steve Rock of Stanford University. He's a rocket scientist that was trying to apply this technology to outer space with the space shuttle for navigating robotics in space. Had the opportunity, he's been working with Mabari to actually apply this to a remotely operated vehicle in inner space.
The Macon had a structured duraluminum hull with 3 interior keels. From the outside, it looked and functioned much like a large blimp. On the inside, the ship was an open cavern of girders, cables, and catwalks, with few places where the crewmen could not go.
So the timing came together. He was working with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. So we took his navigation system, added it to the ROV Tiburon, and went down there and actually mowed the grass. We covered both entire coverage of both wreck sites down there, including the Sparrowhawk airplanes, and created this underwater high-definition photo mosaic.
When those images came back, what were some of the things that you saw right away that were so exciting?
There's a mooring mast on land that would couple to this assembly on the bow or the front of the ship. And sure, it's the strongest point of the ship, but there's a story that goes with that. Lieutenant Harold B. Miller was in charge of the Sparrowhawk aircraft squadron. He wrote it down. As the airship was going down by the tail into the Pacific, he was writing on it. And everybody was encouraging him, jump off into the water. And he's like, why? Why should I get wet?
The Macon was 785 feet long, just 97 feet shorter than the RMS Titanic, and over 4 times the length of today's blimps.
The world's largest airship, 785 feet long, kept aloft by 6,500,000 cubic feet of helium.
There's still a generation around that witnessed the Macon flying, witnessed the Macon under construction. The sounds of her engines, the roar, people would turn out by the hundreds to witness it. And there are letters or covers captured, notarized the Macon through history. And there's also postcards from all the visits it made to various cities across the country. So it was an iconic symbol. There's a certain excitement about history. And when you dive on that site, we are getting a snapshot of history, February 12, 1935. That's what we're looking at.
One of those was David Packard, co-founder of the Hewlett-Packard Company. As an engineering student at Stanford University in the early 30s, Packard remembered being drawn to the window of the classroom as the giant ship crossed overhead. Years later, he would decide to fund the organization and the technology needed to find and preserve maritime treasures like the Macon on the ocean floor. With this new effort, the great airships, their lost men, and their outmoded technologies, which had served the national defense, would become a bridge to a new generation of men and machines in the service of exploration.
We go to visit the Macon site. The Western Flyer, our research vessel, is now hovering over the Macon site. Our little parasite planes are now the ROV tethered underneath the Western Flyer, bringing light to a relatively dark area under the seafloor where the Macon was casting shadows and taking light away as it traversed the United States. So there's a lot of pride in this, plus the unique design of the Macon, a flying aircraft carrier. It's important that we give respect to that site and those sailors.
We hope you're enjoying this special Maritime Heritage episode of Your Sanctuary. If you have comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear them. Email producer Steve Elzy at steve@yoursanctuarytv.org. So we're in Pillar Point Harbor for the next segment of this episode on Maritime Heritage, and I'm with Jim Delgado, who's the National Program Coordinator for all things Maritime Heritage. Jim, welcome to Your Sanctuary.
Thanks, Paul Michelle. Good to be here.
There's something really incredible going on here in Pillar Point. Why don't you tell us what's going on?
Well, we're working with the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research and Boeing to test an amazing vehicle, an autonomous underwater vehicle, or an AUV, known as Echo Ranger, Boeing has provided, and working with the RV Fulmar and with Coda Octopus Echoscope, we're doing a systematic survey in 3,000 feet of water of the USS Independence, the biggest and the deepest shipwreck in Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. USS Independence is famous as the first U.S. Navy aircraft carrier to be dedicated entirely to nighttime operations, carrying the war around the clock in the Pacific. She was built as a CVL. She was the first of her class, and these CVLs are basically means aircraft carrier light. They were built fast and put onto cruiser hulls just to get these ships out there in response to the need for more ships and more planes in the Pacific War. At the end of the war, Independence was set aside and was sent out to Bikini to become a target with about 90 other ships for Operation Crossroads, which is the immediate post-war test of the bomb as a weapon against ships, and survived both blasts but was badly damaged. She was taken back to the United States, and in San Francisco became the base for the Navy's first radiological safety school, where they trained sailors in how to respond if their ship had been in an atomic attack. And ultimately, at the end of her days, was towed out into what today, of course, is the Sanctuary, and scuttled by the Navy on January 26, 1951. Nobody's seen her since, though Okeanos Explorer, our NOAA Ocean Ship of Exploration, did image a little bit of a big sonar blob on the bottom, and that's it until now.
So tell us about where the ship lies. What is the depth there? What's it like down there? What do you hope to see?
Well, Independence is just about 30 miles off and in range of the Farallones at the edge of the shelf in about 3,000 feet of water. As to what exactly is down there, we don't know, because of course when you're on the surface and you're mapping with multi-beam, what you're getting is the kind of relief that may look like a seabed, but the pixels, if you're looking at it in terms of a camera, these pixels are as big as this parking lot. So in terms of exactly how it all sits, we don't know what the seabed looks like. We don't know if Independence is on its side or upside down or right side up. So this survey is all about that, as well as testing the technology. We want to be able to see how well the Sanctuary class small boats work in deploying this new type of technology. We want to be able to see how the Coda Octopus echoscope, which we've used on other Maritime Heritage missions, works in an AUV, which just drives itself down there on the bottom, systematically collecting the data, surfaces, and then on shore it's downloaded, and we take a look, and then out it goes again for another 30-hour mission.
So tell us about getting the images themselves. I mean, you don't just crack open this AUV and out pops pictures.
No, the way it works is that the Coda Octopus folks have this highly refined three-dimensional sonar, and it's good resolution. I mean, you could literally fly over, and if this bench was made of metal and this table is attached to it, you could see all of that. You could see the braces. It's that detailed, and we've seen that with the other work that Coda Octopus has given us in San Francisco Bay and at the Golden Gate with the historic wrecks of the SS City of Chester and the SS City of Rio de Janeiro. But to get that, it's not just the gathering of the data. Then they process it, run it through, and then what you end up with is a three-dimensional map, if you will, of Independence on the bottom. So the deck, this hull, all of those things, if there's a hole in the deck, say where the elevators were, where the planes came up, it will show you those. And it's not just a picture, it's actually a measurable bit of data. In other words, you can say that hole is this big. It's 73 feet by so many feet. It sticks up this high. That's the beauty of this sonar. It's not just imaging. Yeah. It's mapping.
So Jim, tell us about some of the next steps that you're envisioning for all of this information to be shared with the public.
Well, Independence and the mapping of it is part of a 2-year mission to look at the shipwrecks in Monterey Bay, Gulf of the Farallones, National Marine Sanctuaries, as well as Cordell Bank, which we now know has one, and to also look at some of the shipwrecks in the nearby national parks, and state parks for that matter. So ultimately, we're going to do a report on all of those, but in the case of Independence, what we'll likely do is a special report on her and consider if there's going to be any other work. Other work could include diving down to it, but it may be nothing more than just saying, here we know exactly what it is based on this data, and leave it at that.
What about ever going back to the wreck in a manned submersible?
Well, that would be exciting, and having ridden in, submersibles down, a few thousand feet, or in the case of riding to Titanic, 12,000 feet, it's always a thrill to be there as the scientist and to physically interact, even if it's through a sphere in a window with the wreck. I'm not sure what that will happen with Independence. What might happen if we were to dive it would be with a remotely operated vehicle with folks on shore watching. With Okeanos Explorer, we have that capacity in NOAA, and in that means that not only a few people in a sub can look at it, but if you use telepresence-enabled exploration that is a hallmark of Okeanos Explorer and Bob Ballard's Nautilus, then all sorts of folks can tune in and watch at the same time.
Our Sanctuary Spotlight is on Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Monument in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. This monument and marine sanctuary also has fascinating maritime heritage, featuring some very interesting shipwrecks.
As maritime archaeologists, we're coming up here to try and understand what this monument means to our history and the history of Hawaii. And at kind of a whole different level, it's something that you can't see from the surface.
These were a series of atolls that people didn't know about or they weren't well charted. So you have a ship trap catching whatever was passing by.
And I think that those kinds of sites have a lot that they can tell us about ourselves as humans, as seafarers all over the world.
We're in the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and it's the extension of the Hawaiian Island archipelago about 1,000 miles north. One of the most amazing things about working in the monument is the fact that you're totally immersed in this environment and in a whole maritime experience of your own. And so as we're out searching for shipwreck sites and then documenting them, we're looking at these artifacts that remind us of what seafaring was like hundreds of years ago.
The Dunottar Castle was lost in 1886. She was sailing with a cargo of coal from Australia for the west coast of America. And in fact, the castle had been known as a fast sailor, and there were some wagers placed with a couple other British ships to see who would arrive first. And so it may have been a case of cutting a corner. It may have been faulty navigation. But anyway, dark night, the first mate was on deck about 2 in the morning. The officers could smell the guano from a nearby island before they could see anything else, and they were just going down below to wake up the captain when the vessel struck the shoal of Kure Atoll.
The Dunottar Castle wreck site is very complicated because it was an iron ship, so a lot of the hull plating is there, where on a wooden ship that hull has totally deteriorated and all you see are the metal parts that are left behind. But the Dunottar Castle is a very scattered site, but just filled with many, many things. What makes the shipwreck exciting to visit is that there are almost no iron riveted hulls, full rig sailing ships left in the world.
The monument is part of the National Marine Sanctuary Program, and one of the real strengths is that they combine management of these historical resources like the shipwrecks with the natural resources, the coral reefs, the marine mammals. It's a wonderful, pristine environment, and that doesn't mean just shipwrecks or just natural resources. All these things out here are one ecosystem.
What we do as archaeologists when we're working on these remote locations into these sites is basically to document the data, interpret it, and bring that interpretation back to the people. We're collecting site drawings, video, photography, everything that could tell us a little something about that site, because they are a mystery.
In order to document these shipwreck sites, we have a few different methods, and we often begin with the traditional method, which is baseline trilateration, and that involves setting a baseline down the center of the shipwreck site and then taking measurements off of that baseline to different artifacts so that you're able to create a site map. So we're basically drawing up a scale model of what exists on the seafloor.
The Churchill was loaded with 600 tons of copra, which she brought on board from Tonga, and she ran aground at French frigate Shoals on September 27, 1917. The ship was lodged in the coral and in no apparent danger when a passing sampan from Honolulu happened by. And at that time, the captain and first mate came up out of the Churchill saying, "Thank God you're here. There's a fire on board." Apparently a fire broke out. They were rescued from the ship. The odd thing about the story is that after this event, the crew actually filed affidavits charging the captain with the intentional destruction of an American vessel. And you have to remember the captain was a German national, and it was 1917, First World War, so there may have been some of that being brought into play. But the charges were not substantiated, and he was later released.
The schooner Churchill wreck, which was wrecked in 1917, what's really exciting about that is it's just covered with sailing ship rigging. It also is covered with cargo handling rigging. It handled very heavy cargo, so it's a great timeline of what you can experience and expect to see and learn from the shipwrecks represented in the monument.
Well, the collection of artifacts as a whole is like the telling of a story. So when you have all the pages of the story right there, it's a lot easier to retell. So coming out here and really seeing how things lay on the bottom, seeing how artifacts relate to each other, you can glean a lot of information from that as an archaeologist.
Shipwrecks are considered non-renewable resources, and so it's pretty important that we're out here and we're protecting them, and that we understand more, because it's something that it's a part of all of our past and it's a part of all of our heritage.
Last time we hand out stuff like this. You know, the thing we saw today
While at French Frigate Shoals, we decided to investigate an area that was a historic anchorage. We began towboarding in this area, and within the first few minutes of our towboarding session, we discovered a historic anchor. And so when we stopped to investigate the anchor and search around a little more, we discovered what appeared to be an early 19th century shipwreck site.
The whaling wreck that we just found is pretty exciting. Number one, we're the first people to see it. So coming across a new wreck is always probably one of the most exciting things you'll do in your career. But whaling wrecks themselves, and especially these early sites, are pretty intriguing. It's an era that we don't have a ton of material information on, so archaeology can really complement the historical record. When we first came upon the whaling site here on French Frigate Shoals, we just saw the anchor, and the anchor itself indicated that it was a fairly early site, and we didn't see a lot of iron parts scattered about the bottom, and so it was probably a wooden wreck. But it wasn't until we came across the tripods and a huge scatter of bricks that we knew we had a whaling ship for sure. It's one of the best indicators that you have a whaling vessel.
It's always exciting to be able to come up this beautiful location in the atolls, but when you combine that location, the work we're doing with these brand new discoveries, these whaling shipwrecks, this huge worldwide history, it's really exciting. You know, it's seeing these things people haven't seen for well over 100 years.
We hope you enjoyed hearing about maritime treasures studied and protected by our national marine sanctuaries. Over the past 40 years, we've located and identified hundreds of shipwrecks and archaeological artifacts across the nation. The more we look, the more we find. And the more we find, the more we're able to share with you about your sanctuary.